Hi, I'm Bernard Тобін. Welcome to Soybean School. The 2020 harvest is done, and as we move into the new year, we'll be digging into some yield and production data to see what we learned from the soybean harvest in Ontario in 2020. And one guy who always has data insights to share with us is Aaron Brаймер. He's with Deveron. He manages the Data Insights Group. Aaron, thanks for stopping by. Great to have you on Soybean School.
Thanks, Bernard. Always enjoy chatting with you as well as your audience. And like you said, everyone seems to know that I have data and I love to share data. I'm a numbers guy.
You're a numbers guy, and let's talk some numbers. Hey, today, we're going to look at some data from your clients on pre-plant tillage in soybeans versus no-till. And this really goes back to the fall of 2019 when a late harvest meant that a lot of farmers had a lot of corn residue to manage this spring.
Exactly. Actually, to be fair, it actually goes back a couple years before. In 2017 and 2018, we were getting called out to a lot of fields, soybean fields, that were showing some interesting problems, and we diagnosed them as being related to compaction. So when the fall of 2019, if nobody remembers what 2019 was like, it was a challenge to get everything off and fall tillage done properly. So it was a bit of a challenge. And so we had some growers wanting to do spring tillage to manage the corn stalk residue and to be able to plant soybeans into that. So that was what set us up for some interesting data.
Yeah. Now, typically when growers opt for tillage, it's vertical, a vertical tillage tool or a high-speed disc. And but you point out there's a big difference here.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think about 15 years ago was the first time I started to hear the term vertical tillage. And at the time, it had a very clean and clear definition. And it was basically Coulter type machines. And it was actually coming from Western Canada in a lot of cases. But what we have seen is an evolution of the equipment over the last couple of years, where it's more of a European speed disc design that has been coming in, and it's a combination quite often between the two. And yeah, so it is the true vertical till uses strictly Coulters, whereas the high speed discs are using more of a disc type approach.
Yeah, and for you, I mean, as I say, that Coulter versus disc, it really comes down to compaction, right?
100%. I'm trying to think when it was first discovered from the agronomy researchers that discs were a great way to cause compaction. That concave appearance of a disc that allows the downward pressure as well as sideways pressure on the soil. And so when you have both downward and sideways, it adds to a lot more compaction. And compaction, ultimately what it is it's just compressing the soil into a smaller area. So it's squeezing out the air pockets. It's breaking down the structure of the soil. So you have that. We talk bulk density. It basically increases the bulk density. There's more soil for the same amount of area. So the soil is just tighter together. And that's ultimately what compaction is. And when you run into compaction, you run into yield loss for those very things you talked about. And hey, so let's look at some data here. We have 6 sites where a spring tillage pass using a high-speed disc was compared to no-till. And tell us about this data and what you learned. You were surprised here. You were expecting to see something different. 100%. For those of you that are listening that don't know my background, my father started no-tilling back in 1986. His first large acres of no-till soybeans was back in 1991. So no-till is in my blood. And then when you take in what I had seen in 2017 and 2018 with a lot of compaction from these high-speed discs on farms that were going into soybeans, I really expected that we were going to be seeing a yield drag in 2020 from these high-speed discs compared to no-till. So, yeah, I was really surprised by the results. I believe we've got the results up right now. And 6 different sites scattered throughout our territory. Chatham-Kent, Huron County, Middlesex, as far over into Eastern Ontario as well. And consistent, with the exception of, I believe one case, a consistent yield increase from that speed disc. And in all of these cases, they were speed discs. They were not true vertical tillage. They were all speed discs, and we consistently seen a significant, like a big yield bump. If someone had told me that maybe 1 to 2 bushel increase in soybeans, yeah, I would believe that. I'd say, well, it may be year dependent. But wow, like when you're talking an average of 6 bushels per acre on soybeans, that's big money.
So, Aaron, what's the takeaway here from your data? It looks like the yield risk of coal-wet soils and coal and no-till, stocks outweighs the potential risk of tillage compaction. Yeah.
So, like I said, 30 years of my experience has been with no-till. I'm a strong believer in the value of no-till, but every no-till farmer that I've met knows the challenges that they have, that ground stays colder, stays wetter longer. An interesting, completely useless, well, no, actually it is useful fact, is that moisture, so water, will hold heat or absorb heat almost 3,000 times more than air. So when you have wet soils, it's going to stay cooler longer. That residue makes things wetter longer. And so the question is how do you dry it out? So let's face it, 2020, thanks to the fall of 2019, we had to do some tillage, right? I didn't think it was going to pay. I was wrong. Right, so some of your audience is going to love to hear an agronomist actually admit that they were wrong. But this is why we test and how we learn. So when I look at all of this data, tillage to be able to manage corn stalks is important. I would suggest that managing that residue in the fall is better than managing it in the spring. Now, I also know from experience that certain soil types in the spring, they still seal up, even if you do manage that residue in the fall. So the question becomes, how do you manage it in the spring? And obviously, if it's a late spring and things are nice and warm, you probably don't have to. And in fact, if you do till it, it'll be back to 2017, 2018, when we've seen the impact of speed discs and the amount of compaction they were creating. However, on an earlier year, we just need to tickle it, just tickle that surface just a little bit to get a little bit of heat, a little bit of warmth into that soil.
Aaron, hey, some great insights here on soybeans and tillage. Looking forward to some more data in the new year. We'll catch up with you then.